Ever get the feeling that one wrong click could change the entire mood of your night? Good to have you here. We go through real 4chan stories, shared by people who ended up in situations they never expected. This one starts with something easy to ignore, but it doesn't stay that way for long. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and don't forget to subscribe with the bell on. Let's get into it. The job paid $1,200 for maybe 6 hours of work, which was the first thing that should have made me stop. I'd been freelancing out of my apartment in Austin since the pandemic dried up my last full contract. September 2021, still hot enough at night to sleep with the AC on max. My place was one of those cheap one-bedrooms off East Riverside. Thin walls, a balcony overlooking the parking lot of a Whataburger. I worked from a desk pushed against the window because it was the only spot with decent light. The gig came through one of those anonymous platforms. You know the ones. No LinkedIn profile on the client side, just a handle and an escrow balance. The rating was clean, and the escrow had been funded before we even talked. The brief was 3 paragraphs, short Python script, automation of monitoring tasks, pulling from an existing API, formatting output into a JSON payload, dropping it into a queue. Standard stuff. He called himself Mark. No photo, no company name in the description, but that wasn't unusual on that platform. We had one call over their built-in voice thing. Mark sounded like a guy in his 30s, American, maybe East Coast, polite. He said his team was small, and they didn't have the bandwidth to write it internally. He said he'd give me access to a staging environment so I could see the shape of the data. That was fine. That was actually a good sign. Most clients on that site can't even tell you what their stack is. He sent me VPN credentials that night. I remember I was eating leftover carne asada from a place on Cesar Chavez. One hand on the fork, one hand on the trackpad. I connected in, and the first thing I hit was a Grafana dashboard. It was pretty, clean, dark theme, blue accents, little map of the US in the top left, dots pulsing on it. A counter that read, active subjects, 41. A feed on the right side with timestamps. I thought, okay, delivery tracking, or fleet management, maybe a rideshare analytics thing. Companies pay a lot for that kind of stuff, and they're weird about NDAs, which would explain why Mark had been vague. I opened one of the dots. It expanded into a profile card. The card had a photograph, not a stock avatar, not an ID scan, a real photograph, taken at a distance, of a woman getting into a silver Corolla in what looked like an apartment parking lot. Below the photo was a name. First and last. Below that, 2 addresses labeled home and work, both in Denver. Below that, a schedule broken down by day of the week. Monday through Friday, gym at 6:15 a.m., coffee at Ink on Pearl by 7:40, at her desk by 8:30. Grocery run Wednesdays around 6 p.m. Yoga Sundays. There was also a section called Notes. I didn't read those. I closed the tab. I sat there for a minute. The AC clicked on. Down in the parking lot, somebody was arguing with a DoorDash driver about a missing drink. I opened another dot. Different person. Male, 40s, Chicago. Same layout. Photo of him locking up a bike outside what looked like a dental office. Home address, work address. Kids' school listed at the bottom under a subheading called Dependents. One of the kids had a photo too. School photo, red background, missing front tooth. I closed that one faster. I went back to the dashboard and I told myself for maybe 30 seconds that this could be a legitimate skip tracing outfit or a corporate security firm doing executive protection. Both of those exist. Both of those are real jobs. But those companies have logos on their dashboards. They have a terms of service open in a browser tab somewhere. They don't hire strangers off an anonymous platform to write the ingestion script. I opened a third profile because I wanted to be wrong. The photo was of Nora, my girlfriend at the time. We'd been together about 14 months. It was a picture of her standing on the sidewalk outside her office on Congress, phone to her ear, coffee in the other hand. She was wearing the green cardigan her mom got her for Christmas. I knew that cardigan. I'd seen it on the back of my kitchen chair that morning. Her full name was on the card. Her address, which was her actual apartment on East 6th. My address was listed under a field called Associate. There was no photo of me, just the address and a note that said, boyfriend, remote worker, low mobility. Low mobility. Like I was a variable in somebody's risk model. I don't remember standing up, but I was standing. I remember I closed the laptop, and then I opened it again because I needed to check I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. The schedule on Nora's card was accurate to the minute. Her Tuesday spin class. Her Thursday happy hour with a coworker, whose name was also on the card, cross-referenced, own profile linked. The grocery store she went to on Sundays. The route she jogged along Lady Bird Lake, marked with a dotted line and 2 waypoints. I looked at the timestamp on the last update to her profile. It was from 2 hours before I connected in. Someone had updated her card while I was eating dinner. I disconnected the VPN. I unplugged my Ethernet cable, which I know doesn't actually do anything if the VPN is already down, but I did it anyway. I closed the blinds. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame for a while. The apartment was quiet, the way apartments are quiet when you notice all the small sounds. The fridge cycling, the neighbor's TV, a car door somewhere. I did not text Mark. I did not touch the project files. I opened a new browser in incognito, and I went to the FBI's tips site, the online form they have for reporting things. I typed everything I could remember: the platform name, Mark's handle, the VPN endpoint, the number of active profiles, the name of the tool the dashboard was built on. I attached nothing. I didn't want to screenshot anything from inside their system while I was still logged in, and I didn't want to log back in later just to grab evidence. I hit submit around 3 in the morning. I got an automated confirmation email with a case number. Then I called Nora. She answered on the 4th ring, groggy, and I told her I needed her to listen and not interrupt, which is a dumb thing to say to somebody at 3 a.m., but I said it. I told her I couldn't tell her exactly how I knew, but somebody had a file on her, physical addresses, schedule, photos. I told her the routes I knew she ran. I told her the coffee she got on Wednesdays. I told her about the cardigan. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long?" I said I didn't know. The system had been running a while. Her profile had been updated that night. She got up. I heard her moving around her apartment. She said, okay, under her breath. Not to me. Then she said she was going to her sister's in Round Rock in the morning, and she'd figure the rest out from there. She changed jobs within the month. Different building, different part of downtown. She stopped going to the gym she'd gone to for 3 years. She started jogging on a treadmill instead of the lake. She traded her Corolla in for something her sister's husband found on a lot in Pflugerville. Cash, no plates for a week. She got a new phone number. I still had the old one saved for a while, then I didn't. Mark messaged me once, 2 days after I disconnected. Not the platform's DM. He'd found my personal email, which was not on my platform profile. The message was 1 line. Copy that. That was it. No threat, no follow-up. When I logged back into the platform the next morning to screenshot our chat history, his account was gone. The gig was gone. The escrow had been refunded automatically because the contract had been canceled from his side. There was no record he'd ever existed on the site. I waited on the FBI. 3 weeks. I checked my case number every couple of days on their portal. The status stayed the same, a gray dot that said received. No one ever called. No one ever emailed. Eventually, I stopped checking. I don't know what happened to the other 40 people on that dashboard. I don't know if the system is still running under a different name with a different script pulling the data, or if it got taken down, or if Mark just moved on. I don't know if the FBI opened a file, or if my tip is sitting in a queue somewhere with a million others about neighbors and ex-boyfriends and people's tax returns. Nora and I broke up about 8 months later, for regular reasons. She lives in a different state now. She still uses a P.O. box. When she books a flight, she books it in her sister's name. I still take freelance work. I don't take anything from anonymous clients anymore. I ask for a company name and a real human on video before I sign. Most people are fine with that. The ones who aren't, I pass on. I keep thinking about the timestamp. 2 hours before I opened the dashboard, somebody had updated her card. Somebody was watching her that evening while I was eating dinner at my desk, and they typed what they saw into a form, and then they hit save, and then they went to bed, probably. Like it was a job. I've been restoring old photographs for about 11 years now, most of it from a spare bedroom in my apartment in Bay Ridge. It's steady work if you're patient and you don't mind sitting in the dark. People send me tintypes, damaged wedding portraits, Polaroids their mothers left them, and I clean them up. That's the job. That's all I want to talk about, and it's the reason I'm writing any of this down. The file came in on a Tuesday in January. Cold Tuesday, one of those Brooklyn mornings where the radiators bang so loud you think somebody's at the door. The client was a guy named Peter, referred through another restorer I know upstate. He said he'd found a photograph in his grandmother's estate after she passed, and he wanted it cleaned up for his mother's 70th birthday. Standard ask. He sent me a scan. Not a great one. He'd used a flatbed at what looked like 600 dpi, which is fine for the print itself, but the original was small, maybe 4 inches by 5, and the emulsion had cracked in a dozen places. I opened it in Photoshop and did what I always do first. Sat with it, zoomed to 100%, looked. It was a family photograph. Late 1800s from the look of the clothing. Father seated in a wooden chair, mother standing behind him with one hand on his shoulder, 3 children lined up in front, 2 boys in short jackets and a little girl in a dress with a lace collar. Behind them was the front of a wood frame farmhouse. White clapboard, a window to the left of the door, and above the porch, another window on the 2nd floor. The photograph had been taken in bright afternoon sun. The shadows were sharp. I noted the damage. Foxing along the top edge, a scratch running through the mother's skirt, some silver mirroring in the corners. Nothing I hadn't handled before. I told Peter I'd have a proof back to him by the end of the week, and quoted him $350. He agreed, and I got to work. The faces of the family were soft. That's normal. On a print that old, scanned at that resolution, you don't get much detail in the features. You get the shape of a face, the darkness of the eyes, an impression of a mouth. When people ask me to make Grandpa clearer, I have to explain that clearer isn't really an option. You can smooth the emulsion damage, adjust contrast, but you can't invent detail that was never captured. The father in this photo had a mustache. I could tell that much. I couldn't have told you if he was smiling. That's what makes what happened next stick with me. I was working on the mother's face, dodging some of the shadow under her jaw, when I noticed something in the upper window of the house behind her, a shape. At the resolution I was working at, it looked like a pale oval in the dark rectangle of glass. Which is normal. In photographs from that era, especially of farmhouses, you often see people in the windows. Servants, other family members, kids who weren't in the main shot, sometimes even the photographer's assistant. It's not always a spirit or a mystery. Usually it's just somebody looking out. So I zoomed in. The oval was a face, male from what I could tell at first pass, looking directly at the camera. I zoomed in more, past 100%, and started to lose the image to pixel mush the way you always do at that magnification. Except I wasn't losing it. The face was getting sharper. I stopped, sat back, drank some coffee, told myself the scan had some kind of local sharpening applied. Maybe Peter had run it through an auto-enhance without realizing. That happens more than you'd think. Clients feed old photos to some app on their phone and send me the output, thinking they've helped. I zoomed back out to check the rest of the image. The father's face was still soft. The mother's face was still soft. The children were smudges of features on pale skin. Everything was at the resolution I expected. The face in the window was not. I want to be careful here about how I describe it, because I've had months to think about it, and I want to be honest. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't doing anything a face shouldn't do. It was just a face, in the window of a farmhouse, looking out at the camera. And it was rendered at a level of detail the rest of the photograph physically could not contain. I could see his eyelashes. I could see a small mark on his cheek, near the jaw. I could see the shape of his upper lip. On a scan where the little girl in the front row was more or less a suggestion of a person, this guy in the window had pores. I opened the file properties. 600 dpi, exactly what Peter said. I checked the layers in case I'd somehow duplicated something. I hadn't. I opened the original attachment from the email again, fresh, in case my working file had been corrupted. Same result. Zoomed all the way in on the family. Mush. Zoomed all the way in on the window. A photograph. I sat with that for maybe 20 minutes. My radiator was banging. Somebody down on the street was scraping ice off a windshield with a plastic scraper, and I remember the sound getting under my skin, that dry rasp that goes on and on. Then I looked at his clothing. He was wearing a dark coat with a high collar, the kind you'd expect in that period. A vest underneath maybe, hard to say. His hair was cut short at the sides, longer on top, brushed back off his forehead. That part was wrong, but I didn't clock it right away. 19th century men, most of them, wore their hair with a side part, or slicked flat, or under a beard that ate half the face. This guy's hair looked like something a barber in Williamsburg would give you for $80. His face was clean-shaven. His eyebrows were groomed. He had that kind of narrow, slightly hollow look that men have now, from too much screen time and not enough sleep. His expression was neutral, not friendly, not angry. Just watching. I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I compared him to photos I had of my ex, which were on the same laptop, in a folder I hadn't opened in a year. I don't know why I did that. I think I wanted him to look like somebody I could name. He didn't. But he looked like he belonged in the same century as my ex, and he did not belong in the same century as the family standing on the porch in front of him. I closed the file, made lunch, ate half of it, opened the file again. He was still there, still sharp. I zoomed in further than I had before, further than made any technical sense, and the face held. At some point, I realized I was leaning close enough to the monitor that my breath was fogging a small patch of the screen, and I sat back and wiped it with my sleeve and felt ridiculous. Here is what I did not do. I did not call Peter. I did not tell him there was something unusual about his grandmother's photograph. I did not send him a zoom of the window and ask if he recognized the man. I thought about all of that and I did none of it, because if I told him, he'd want to see it, and if he saw it, he'd tell his mother, and it was her 70th birthday. I removed him. It's not hard once you decide to do it. You mask the window, sample the interior tone from a clean patch of the pane, paint it in, feather the edges, drop the opacity on the top layer so the reflection reads natural. In the delivery notes, I told Peter I had cleaned up a small film artifact in the upper window that was pulling the eye away from the family. He wrote back an hour later and said thank you. It looked beautiful. His mother was going to cry. She did cry, apparently. He sent a photo of her holding the framed print. She's a nice-looking woman with her father's chin. I kept the original file. The unedited scan, with the face in the window, is still on an external drive on the shelf above my desk. I don't know why I kept it. I tell people it's because I keep everything, which is true, I do. I've got backups going back to 2012, but I don't open the other files. I open this one, not often, every few weeks. I plug the drive in, load the scan, zoom in on the window, and I look at him for a little while. He looks back. Nothing happens. He doesn't move, he doesn't change, the pixels don't shift. It's just a photograph of a man in a farmhouse window in the 1890s, wearing a coat from the 1890s, with a face and a haircut from about 6 months ago. I don't know what he is. I have a couple of theories I'm not going to write down, because writing them down feels like giving them weight. He might be someone who was there, in that window, in that year, and my software is doing something impossible with the data. He might be someone who was never there, and is there now. He might be someone who's going to be there, and the photograph is showing me the wrong end of a line I can't see. I did think at one point about deleting the file. I got as far as right-clicking on it. Then I put the drive back on the shelf. The last time I opened it was 2 nights ago. I'd had a glass of wine, which I don't usually do when I work. I zoomed in the way I always do. He was there the way he always is. And I noticed, or I think I noticed, that the mark on his cheek near the jaw was slightly lower than the last time. Not by much, by the width of a pore maybe. I closed the file. I put the drive back on the shelf. I'm probably wrong about the mark. I'm probably wrong about a lot of it. I'm going to keep the drive. The stretch of the Buffalo River I fish sits about 40 minutes west of a town called Linden, down a gravel cut that most GPS apps refuse to acknowledge. My uncle showed it to me when I was 12. You put in below an old iron bridge, drift about a quarter mile, and there's a bend where the current slows against a limestone shelf. Catfish stack up there in summer. In June, if you go after midnight, you basically have the water to yourself. That's where I was on the night I'm going to tell you about. First week of June, 2022. I remember because I'd just come off 2 weeks of night shifts at the plant, and I was still on that upside-down clock where 2 in the morning feels like lunch. I launched around 11. My boat is nothing fancy, a 12-foot aluminum john with a trolling motor and a battery that's older than my dog. I had a small Coleman lantern hooked to the bow, a thermos of coffee, a bag of chicken livers, and a cheap Bluetooth speaker playing a baseball game on low. The Braves were losing. The river that night was doing what it does when there's been rain upstream. On the surface it looks calm. Underneath it's moving hard. You can see it in the way little sticks and leaves pull through the eddies. If you fell in wearing boots, you weren't getting out where you went in. You were coming out 300 yards downstream, if you came out at all. I anchored near the shelf and put 2 lines in the water. For maybe an hour, nothing. A raccoon crossed a downed sycamore upstream and stared at me long enough to feel personal. A barred owl was working the ridge above me, doing the whole 8-note call, and something bigger, probably a beaver, slapped the water once behind me and made me spill coffee on my leg. Then I noticed her. The far bank on that bend is not really a bank. It's a gravel bar that sticks out maybe 8 feet from the tree line before the ground drops off into deep water. In daylight, it looks like a beach. At night, past my lantern light, it's just a paler stripe against the black of the woods. She was standing at the edge of that stripe, ankle deep in the river, facing me. I want to be clear about what I saw, because I've replayed it enough that I don't fully trust my own memory anymore. She was a woman, maybe in her 40s, wearing what looked like a light-colored nightgown or a long shirt, bare arms, bare legs from the knees down, hair down past her shoulders, dark, wet-looking, though I couldn't tell if it was actually wet or just the light. She wasn't waving, she wasn't calling, she was just standing there with her feet in the current, looking straight across at my boat. The first thing that ran through my head was that she'd waded out from a campsite. There's a spot maybe half a mile up the west side where people pitch tents. Sometimes drunks wander. That was the reasonable version, and I went with it for about 10 seconds. Then I clocked the water at her feet. It was moving, fast, and she was not moving with it, not swaying, not doing that little balance shuffle you do when a current pushes on your ankles. She was just planted. "Hey," I called across. Not loud, not yet. Testing. "You okay over there?" Nothing. No head tilt. No answer. I killed the speaker. The baseball game cut off and the river got real big in my ears. Just water, owl, wind in the sycamores. I tried again, louder. "Ma'am, that water's moving pretty good." "You need to step back." She didn't move. I sat there for probably a full minute before I did anything. I know how that sounds, but there's a thing that happens when something is wrong in a way you don't have a template for, where your brain keeps trying to file it under a normal category and failing. Camper, drunk, lost kid's mom. None of it fit, and while my head was cycling through folders, my hands were just holding a coffee cup. She said something. I saw her mouth move, watched her jaw work, but between the distance and the river noise, all I got was a shape of sound, a low female voice that ran maybe 5 or 6 syllables and then stopped. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a call for help in any way I recognized. It was the cadence of somebody finishing a sentence in a normal conversation, like she was answering a question I hadn't asked. "I can't hear you," I called. "Hold on. Just stay right there. Don't step out any further." She said it again. Same length, same flat delivery. That's when the back of my neck started doing that thing where the skin feels tight. Not from her, from the situation. Because at that point, I understood, without being able to explain it, that whatever was happening on that gravel bar was not a normal person having a normal night. I had 2 choices. pull anchor and go back to the ramp and call the sheriff from the truck, which would put a deputy on that road in 45 minutes minimum, or motor across the river myself and see what was going on. I want to say I made a heroic decision. I didn't. I made the decision you make when you've been raised on a river and somebody's ankle deep in current at 1 in the morning. You go get them. You figure the rest out later. I hauled anchor, dropped the trolling motor in, and pointed the bow at her. The Buffalo isn't wide there, maybe 70 yards, but with the current, I had to angle upstream to keep from getting swept past the bar. That meant I couldn't look straight at her the whole time. I had to keep glancing at the water, then back at her. Glance, glance. Every time I looked back, she was still standing there. About halfway across, I called out again. "I'm coming to you, just stay where you are." She said the same string of syllables, same length, same tone. I could almost hear it now that I was closer, and I still couldn't make out a single word. It wasn't English exactly, or it was English so slurred it may as well not have been. When the bow was maybe 15 feet from the bar, she took a step back. Just one step, out of the water, onto the gravel. Slow, not startled. She was still facing me. I killed the motor and let the boat coast. Hey, ma'am, please stay right there. I'm just gonna pull up and check on you, okay?" Another step back. She was on the gravel now, close to where the tree line started. "Ma'am, don't go in the woods, please." She turned, not fast. Turned like somebody who'd finished what they came to do, and she walked into the trees. I watched the pale shape of that nightgown move maybe 6 or 7 feet into the brush, and then it was gone. Not faded, not vanished, just the woods swallowed the color, and that was that. I ran the bow up onto the gravel harder than I meant to, and the boat scraped and I about went face first into my tackle box. I grabbed the lantern, grabbed my phone, and I stood on that bar for a good 10 seconds without moving, because I did not want to go into those trees. Every reasonable part of me wanted to shove off, get back to my truck and let the professionals handle it. But I kept thinking about the current, and about her not being in it anymore. I stepped up to where she'd been standing, and I put the lantern low. There were footprints in the wet gravel, regular footprints. Bare, human, adult, maybe a woman's size 7 or 8, coming out of the water and going toward the trees. They were real. That was almost the worst part. I called out into the woods. "Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. Do you need help?" Nothing. Not even a footstep in leaves. I went in. There was a trail. It wasn't a hiking trail, more like a game path somebody had walked enough times to widen. I followed it maybe 200 yards, calling out every few steps, my lantern turning every rhododendron leaf into a face. The trail bent uphill and came out on the shoulder of a county road I didn't know was even that close. Parked on the shoulder, mostly off in the weeds, was a silver Toyota Camry, driver's door open, dome light on, keys in the ignition, and the little chime going. There was a purse on the passenger seat, a phone face down on the dash. A pair of sandals in the driver's footwell, neatly together, like somebody had stepped out of them before getting in the car. I did not touch anything. I stepped back onto the road, and I called 911. The dispatcher was calm, the way they train them to be. I told her what I'd seen, where I was, what the car looked like, plate and all. She kept me on the line while she pushed units. It took a deputy 19 minutes to reach me, and in those 19 minutes I stood on that road with my lantern, and I did not turn my back on the woods. They found her about 4 hours later, a little over 3 kilometers away, on the other side of a ridge, sitting on someone's back porch. She was alive, barefoot, cut up from the brush, but alive. The homeowner said she hadn't spoken when he opened the door, just sat. I didn't get the full story. Deputies don't share much. But one of them, a guy about my age, told me later she'd had what he called a dissociative episode, off her medication for a stretch, out of state visiting family, drove off in the middle of the night without telling anyone. He said they'd tracked her route, and the Camry had been parked on that shoulder for close to 2 hours before I saw her. He said if I hadn't crossed when I did, she was heading deeper. And deeper on that ridge is a lot of nothing for a long way. The part I keep coming back to isn't the woods. It's the water at her feet. I've fished that bend since I was a kid. I know how that current pulls. She was standing in it like it was a puddle in a driveway. She wasn't. It was pulling on her, the same as it would pull on anybody. She just wasn't feeling it. All right, that's where we'll stop for today. Drop your thoughts below, tell me what you liked or didn't like, and subscribe if you want more. Today's 4chan posts had that uncomfortable feeling where nothing seems wrong at first, until one detail changes everything. So maybe trust that weird feeling in your stomach tonight. See you in the next one.